Hey Kelly, thank you for coming in. You do have such an amazing background, early inspiration and mentorship, entry to the music industry, pioneering digital media at Apple, digital music innovation, entrepreneurship and consulting, and leadership and influence. I mean, you're sort of remarkable in all the things you've done throughout your life, and we'll mine that. We'll kind of walk through that
Certainly,
chronologically as
certainly.
well. So thank you for coming in and just sharing.
Pleasure's mine, Stephen.
So Kelly, you got this remarkable career and you're continuing to have outsized contributions globally. And so what were those, inflection points in your life, let's say three, that made you who you are today? That could have been when you're 3 or 5 years old. It could have been mentors inside and outside the family. It could have been early career moves, particular opportunities that came up. Excuse me, could have been educational experiences. So what were he would say, and I know with you it'd be like 200 or more, but what were maybe the three that really helped shape you to who you are today?
Well, that's a big question, and I really wish I had a little more time to think about it, but I'm going to just go off the top of my head. Always a good way to go, right? Um, you know, I think I had a series of stepfathers, let's just put it that way, and that I would get very close to, and then they would rotate out. But I got very close to them. They saw things in me that nobody else did, and they validated me at a young age, very young age. And so that was incredible for me. That was a wonderful shaping to be seen and acknowledged by people I really cared about early on in my life. Um, and then I'm going to jump to 8 years old. I grew up at a time when, there was a lot of creativity in the world, a lot of chaos as well. And my mother was a college professor, so I was surrounded by college students all the time, very bright, intelligent people that were forward looking. I'm certain that shaped me. But they all listened to the Beatles, and that became my touchstone culturally. And I would see some footage of this man behind the Beatles, and I thought, who is that? What is he doing? Of course, I would learn later that was George Martin. But I could see, even at my young age of 8, it just broke loose. The crystal ball cracked in terms of this is my destiny. What he's doing for them is what I want to be doing in the world. Now, I thought that what he was doing was just being a record producer and a recording engineer. So in high school, I studied that. As soon as I could drive, I took recording academy, went to a recording academy and took classes. I thought I'm going to do what he did. But I didn't realize till much later that what he was doing was being an activator for visionaries, bringing new lenses that they couldn't see for themselves, and effectively becoming the fifth member of the band by being that catalyst for transformation. That's really what I wanted to do, and that's what I have become, and we'll get to that at this point in my life. I guess the third inflection point would have to be when I was 16, growing up in the orchards in Cupertino before it was Silicon Valley, and uh, being fortunate to be in this group called Future Business Leaders of America in high school, where they challenged us to find a local business person to be our mentor. And there was only one name on my list. I was watching from day one when I knew Apple was being birthed in the backyard, literally in my backyard in Cupertino. And I was always mesmerized by Steve, even at that point. And I would see him at the local hippie cafes that my mom frequented, with college students and everything else. And so I just went up to him one day and said, look, this is my challenge, and here's who I am, and I would love for you to be my mentor. I had a lot of gumption. I still do. And he asked me a few pointed questions, sized me up, and said, I've not done this before. Let's give it a try. And so began a 30 plus year journey until about a year before he passed, where I had the wonderful privilege of having him as my personal mentor.
That's a remarkable journey. Now let's go back and mine this even further,
Oh, and let
right?
me put
So
a wrapper on that. He also saw me, like I said at the beginning with the stepfathers. Steve got who I was. Most people at that point in my family, other people didn't understand me. I was the weird one. I thought differently. I they didn't understand what was going on in my head. Steve got that, and that's why he agreed to accept me and take me on. So it was
Yeah,
this validation, bookend validation from the stepfathers to Steve.
yeah, I mean it's really interesting about you have these people that enter your life and they can recognize you're different, but
Hmm.
and different in a way that produces opportunity or can be outsized in terms of contribution. They can see that kind
Correct.
of seed. Okay, so that's really remarkable, and we'll touch on that throughout this interview. The other thing too is that you grew up in kind of like the magic part of the world before it was
Hmm.
Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And you saw the growth of Silicon Valley to where it is today. But when you're at
And
these
help shape it. Literally, I would lay apricots from the fields and the orchards to dry for a summer job where I would later work in the same dirt in an apple building.
yeah, exactly.
You
So
know,
you're helping you're part of the movement that becomes a movement, right? And then
correct.
becomes a global iconic sort of showcase for the
And
rest of the world
weirdly,
to
because
model.
Cupertino is like a podunk town, we don't even have a downtown here. But also what was going on was music magazines, globally recognized big music magazines were in the back, were in Cupertino. Guitar player, keyboard, bass magazines right there. And I put myself through college working there. And so I didn't have to go anywhere. It was like a Forrest Gump thing, but the world came to me.
Yeah, and but something that intrigued me is that you mentioned your mother was a college professor. So
Yes,
what did she teach?
English.
English. Ah,
So
that's really interesting.
I was a voracious age of always have been, still am, still read 2 books a week. But I was reading before, I was reading before I even started kindergarten, and then I was grading her college students' papers when I was like 9. So that was the
You know,
privilege of having a mother as a college professor. It just dove right in.
yeah, and because of college professor in English, just to give you a little bit of my history. I mean, I taught for a few years, right? And and there used to be a program for people who are re-entering, going back into some kind of second career. And I would actually find the students who had some kind of English lit background or studied formally English, they had degrees in English or what, they actually turned out to be great programmers. So there's something
Interesting,
about,
yeah.
so there's a connection with logic or something like that.
Indeed, indeed. And weirdly, we'll come to that maybe later in the Apple discussion, but I've always been a very balanced brain person, which is kind of unusual, I guess. But at Apple, and I'm also left-handed, at Apple, we had this disproportionate number of people who, of course, they're programmers, but we also had a lot of creativity. So we had a lot of right brain people, myself included. I lean right, but I'm also left-handed, and we had a disproportionate number of left-handed people at Apple.
So, so you really grew up in a great environment though, right?
Yeah.
Because just the location, but your mother's a professor, and then she's sharing openly, "Hey, I got these student assignments. I want you to help me," and stuff like that. Right? So,
Actually, I didn't have a choice.
yeah,
But, yeah.
yeah, but that would help form you. That would
Yes.
be right
Yeah, it did.
because
Oh, it
because
did. Absolutely.
because she treated you like a peer.
And and I had a twin sister. I'm a reluctant twin. I'm not a normal twin. I'm a reluctant twin. And so like when we were in the fourth grade, we were going to enter the fourth grade. My mom had a teaching sabbatical, so we were going to go live in Asia for a year. And weirdly, in the fourth grade, they studied Asia. And the teachers were like, your girls are advanced. They can skip a grade. Go have them experience it. We're going to read it in a book. They're going to go live it. So we skipped a grade and had our fourth grade year in Asia, you
Yeah,
know?
so that's really, really fortunate to have that environment where you're able to visit other countries, you
Yeah.
get exposed to literature. Your
Hmm.
mother's a professor, so education is encouraged or curiosity is encouraged.
Absolutely. And creativity.
Yeah, and she's not putting limitations on you, right? Because hey,
No.
I want you to mark these my students' exams and stuff or
Well,
whatever.
and a lot more. My mom was wildly creative, so I learned how to do all kinds of creative crafts and stuff too. So, it was the world I grew up in, you know.
So it sounds like your mom was kind of
Very much a
uh,
Renaissance person.
yeah, sort of hippie-ish. It sounds
But
like.
somewhat. She did wear, heels and dresses, but for teaching in those days. But inherently, she was a free spirit and still is. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And then of course you're watching TV when you're 8 and you see George Mountain or you see this person on the
Yeah.
screen and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. Who I would later come
who
to know.
and
Yeah.
that I want to be that person that makes others do
Yeah.
what they're
Everybody
doing,
is watching the Beatles. I'm watching him.
right?
I'm watching the
Because
man behind the curtain.
yeah, because he's like orchestrating it, right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
he's like the Wizard of Oz in a
I
way,
figured
right?
out that he was the one that was I needed to pay attention to what he was up to. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you belong to this school program where they
Yeah.
encourage you to find some business person or whatever to be a mentor, and you see
Willy
Steve
Wonka.
Jobs, yeah, you see
Yeah.
Steve Jobs in the local cafe, and you actually walk up to him and say, "Hey, I want you to be my mentor,"
And
and he goes,
shockingly, he said yes.
"Yeah, but if anybody would, it would be him, right? Because he'd be
Yeah.
curious, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then he'd ask you questions to see if."
How my mind worked.
Yeah, and he would be very conscious of time. So he's thinking, if I'm going to put this energy in, I want to make sure that there's a receptacle here that I can work with, right? Or guide or mentor in
And
some
what he
way.
said that very day that was so prescient and so validating was, you can see around corners.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you recall the questions he asked?
Um, I honestly don't. Sometimes fragments come through, but I don't recall. I was so focused on being present that I just wanted to engage.
So when he said you could see around corners, did he say that afterwards or even during that
After,
first?
well, in the very first meeting, in the very first conversation. And that's what I guess encouraged him to invest the time in me
Right.
because he was that way too.
Yeah, but then that means he thought you would have said something showing that you could see around corners.
Yes,
He could see that you're thinking about the future and its implications today, and
correct.
it would be outlier thinking. It wouldn't be
That's
what
exactly right. He picked up on the systems thinking that I have. Yeah,
yeah, but it would have to be ahead. Otherwise, it wasn't the 90% of what everybody else is thinking. It's
correct.
it's the
And
1% where
remember
nobody,
this too, Stephen. I was surrounded by college students, so I aged very rapidly at a young age. I
right,
was an intellectual at a very young age. So I
right.
could keep up. He was 9 years older than me, but I was used to being around people that were older than me. So he could pick up the intelligence and the vision that it was instilled in my DNA at that point.
Yeah, I
And
mean, so that's
then in our work together, he completely rewired my DNA. So I still look at the world through his eyes, aesthetically, everywhere I go, stuff like that.
so when he agrees to mentor you, how do you systemize that? Is this like, okay, every Monday we're going to
No, no,
talk
no,
about,
it wasn't that way. It was much more open-ended and casual.
right?
So sometimes he would say, "Hey, we're going to do something over here. I think you should take a look at," in the early Macintosh stuff. Or I would say, "I've got this challenge going on. I'm trying to figure out whether I should go to LA and spend a couple of years being in the record industry." And so then we would do a walk and talk. We did a lot of walk and talks. Um,
Right.
he did compartmentalize our time, so I never did get to interact with a lot of the people around him, and I never did spend too much time with his family, for example. But I had unprecedented access to him. The bat phone, and when I would reach out, even until close to when he passed on an email, he would respond in 15 minutes.
Yeah, so he would consider you a mentee, but probably a friend of some sort as well, right?
Certainly, and he knew that I would never divulge any of the secrets that he shared with me or
Right.
any of his own confidences. He knew that, as did later in my world when I was working with Michael Jackson and Prince. People that were genius caliber people that I gravitated to, they also knew they could trust me inherently, even when they were gone. And I still have not divulged any of the things I've discussed with these people and never will.
Yeah, I mean that'd be fascinating, and particularly with Steve Jobs because he's definitely thought in a unique way, right?
Yep.
And so as a result, he transformed the world, and he matured too in his thinking about his relationship with others, which is good, right? Because you can't be just
Yeah, but a lot of people have bashed him over the years, in some ways rightly so, for how he treated people. But I want you to know I've spent a good chunk of my time since he passed for legacy in that regard because that was not my experience of him with me. I
right.
did witness him behaving that way with other people, but I understood why. It wasn't the best thing to do, but he could see that people were not operating at full potential, and that drove him batty. So
Right,
his way of doing that was reprimanding them as opposed to encouraging them. But
right.
that's what it was. It was that you're not living up to your potential, and that's frustrating me. That's really what was going on.
Yeah, and I guess there are elements of that in Bill Gates, and there's I guess all of them in some way. There's always these elements where they really push hard, and then it's difficult for some people around them, right? So,
Yeah.
um, okay, so you discuss these inflection points, and I can see how these shaped you to who you are today. Okay, so you're very young, you're 16, and now you decide I'm going to go to. So, what are the things that interested you in high school?
Music tech. I wanted to bring the worlds of music and technology together. I was ferociously focused on that. And I could see the potential of that happening and would spend my time hanging around with anybody who would align with me on that and learn how to play, big synthesizers that were available at the time. And just anybody who was in that realm was in my orbit. Um, uh, I was a AP student, so I was very focused on my studies in high school to get the best grades I could get. I wasn't always the best student, grades wise, partly because it bored me. I didn't want to have to regurgitate data. Um, but I always was very passionate about pop culture. I'm a rock and roll Jeopardy champion. I mean, I really, and not just music, but media in general. So not just watching or listening to media at that time, but wanting to know how the sausage was made. So literally in college, then taking film as my minor, learning how to edit film with, in those days, with razor blades and splicing. I wanted to get behind the scenes. I wanted to get immersed in the production of all of that. So that was just ravenous about that.
Yeah, so you're entering into the music industry,
And media more broadly, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're attending college in the early 1980s, and you worked at GPI Publications, right?
Yes, that was the Guitar Player Keyboard magazine Enclave. They had bass and frets, all of that. Yeah.
And then after college, you went to EMI Music as an NNA
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yeah.
RO, right? So,
I worked out of the Capitol Records Tower, the round building in Hollywood, as a young
right.
A&R executive.
Yeah, and
And the
you
reason for
man,
that was I tried to go the path I thought I was going on, which was to be a record producer and a recording engineer and all that. But when I got to Hollywood, I literally found out that that was never going to happen. That was a lockout profession for women. And to this years later, I can count on one hand how many very successful female record producers there have been. So I had to pivot. And I was very good at networking, a lot of gumption, like you heard about with Steve. I did that in the music industry as well. And I met the right people who then got me my job at Capitol, EMI. And so I still worked with artists, but I went into the talent side, going out and scouting them at night, working with the artists that were on the label, making sure, I was part of shaping the music videos and, what they were going to wear and helping find the songs for them to sing if they didn't have enough of their own. And their touring and all of that.
yeah, and you
So
indicated you had a chance to work with Michael and Prince and people like that, right?
yes,
So,
but that was much more personal. That was with them specifically one on one, me being a trusted advisor to them. That was much later in my career.
I
Um,
see.
so when I was doing this work at Capitol and EMI, The problem was I had to live in LA, and I'm not a big fan of LA. I'm California is two different states in my opinion, and it was just too uh, what's the word? I don't want to say anything that's going to upset people in Los Angeles, but there, there was a little bit of false. It was like, what kind of car are you driving? What clothes are you wearing? Very superficial things. And I was much more deep and still am. And I didn't care about any of that. I cared about who are you? How are you wired? What are your values? What are your morals? Do we have anything in common? What do you do for fun? I mean, what are you doing to expand yourself and grow yourself? And most people were not, they were more shallow than that. And I didn't want to live in that kind of a environment. So I came back to the Bay Area. Also, I had a boyfriend who later became my fiance, later my husband, who I had left in the Bay Area. So I would go back and forth. My family was still in Cupertino. So I would go back and forth those years that I was in LA. And then finally, friends that had gone to Apple, because Steve was already out at that point, he'd been kicked out. Friends at Apple, having nothing to do with Steve, said, we think we want to start a focus on music here at Apple, and you're the person to do it. There you are down there. You built the relationships, you know how the industry works. And so I participated with a very tiny team in launching Apple's earliest focus on music and entertainment, and ultimately became the person in the company that was driving that. Um, Again, these were the years that Steve was gone, but we of course kept our relationship the whole time he was gone.
Yeah, so you doing pioneering digital media work at Apple. You joined in the late 1980s, and
Hmm.
you returned to Silicon Valley. You mentioned, and you're literally like the pioneer executive in the intersection of technology and music. And of course,
And
that's a
media,
perfect,
film too.
yeah, yeah, and it fits your background with entertainment, and you became part of it, like you said, it's a very small projects team tasked with launching Apple's earliest initiatives in music
Right.
and media.
And growing the
And
relationships to make that. Our job was to make sure at that time that everybody in Hollywood, all the creators, be they filmmakers or musicians, were using the Macintosh as their
right,
creative partner of choice to create content.
yeah, and
And so I had to build and manage those relationships.
yeah, again, that's a remarkable time, right? 10 years
Yeah.
at Apple, launched
Hmm.
and ran Apple's music and entertainment business, and you drove all of Apple's music-related strategies,
Hmm. Hmm.
digital media efforts, pioneering basically everything that happened.
And laying the
And
foundation for what would later become Apple Music and what's happening today. Yeah. Which of
yeah, yeah,
course is a multi-billion dollar industry.
yeah, you gave the birth to the concept of online music at Apple,
Yeah.
forerunner of what became iTunes and Apple
If I have
Music.
any regrets, it's that I birthed that baby, but did not get the chance to see it through its teen years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're still there at the beginning.
And
Right.
I'm still a mile from the campus. Steve does not seem to want to let me leave the area. I'm still here in Cupertino for whatever reason.
Because you had such a foundational role, and then you were there when Steve was at its founding, and then Steve, of course, left, and then he came back and
Yeah.
saved the company, right,
Thank God.
to
The
where it
company
is
was,
today.
I was there when it was one quarter away from dying, when he just had come back.
Yeah,
And a lot of
sadly.
people don't realize this, but had it not been for his friendship with and love-hate relationship with Bill Gates wrote the check that saved Apple when Steve came back.
Yeah, he wrote the bridge financing.
It would not have happened without that. No way.
I know, but it's remarkable for Bill to do it.
And a lot of people don't realize that's what happened.
Yeah, and in fact, when it was announced that Bill
At
was going to,
Macworld, he shows up like the 1984 commercial, and everybody's screaming, "Oh my God, what's happening? What's happening?"
I know, but pe people were booing Bill.
They were big time. I was in the room. It was something to watch.
I mean, he saved. I mean, literally, Apple had like one quarter of
One
cash
quarter.
left.
Yeah. Notwithstanding the fact that they had just spent the last $400 million to buy Next, which
Right.
of course became the operating system of the Mac OS, but and gave
Mhm.
Steve his opportunity to take it over. But yeah, that's exactly what happened in 97, second half of 97.
So, but then you left, right?
Yeah, it was not my choice. It was very painful because Apple was and remains a huge part of my identity and my DNA. Um, Steve said one day, we took a walk and talk. He said, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I'm coming back. The bad news is you're leaving because the company was in such terrible shape. He chose to pare the sector down to two from God knows 20, just publishing and education to get the company back on its feet, and from like 30 products to eight.
Mhm.
And he wasn't going to focus on music and entertainment.
Right.
So he said, here's what you do. You still have me, you still have all your friends at Apple and everybody you create relationships on the outside. Go a mile down the road to your home office and start your consulting practice. When I need you, I will reach out. And that's basically what happened. But I was heartbroken. I didn't want to leave Apple. And I still am very much tied to my DNA is very much in the walls over there.
Do you still
But
do
it was
con?
probably the best thing for me to be able to, in hindsight, to have the breadth of experiences that I've had and built the career I have. But I missed out on all the upside of the stock and all of that, you know. So
Right. So you start your consulting business, and
yeah,
Steve Jobs said this is what you should do, become a
yeah.
consultant, right? Because you have
Mm-hmm.
all the relationships there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and consulting is relationships, right?
Yep.
So okay, so tell me that what that was like. I mean, who were your first clients, and how did that work? And
My first client was Napster. And I absolutely loved the leaders that were running the company. They were all lawyers, but I loved them. And I helped them understand how the labels thought, how the relationship with the artists. Prince called me one day and said, "You know what? They've got my music on Napster. I want that taken down. I want you to put me on the phone with Hank Berry." Hank was the CEO, and who I was very close to, still am. And so Hank and I got on the phone with him, and I said, "You know, Prince, this is going to be a waste of your time because the minute we take the music down, other people around the world are going to put it right back up." It's the way it
Right,
works. And so we ultimately arranged with him to do a promotional thing for his next CD on Napster. At least he got the part about the 70 million people could actually be an audience as opposed to what Metallica did, which is try to put the fans in jail.
right.
But in the end, the labels prevailed in trying to put the genie back in the bottle because with Napster going on, they were rapidly losing their market share,
Right.
and they shut the company down. Um, but that was my first company that I advised outside of Apple, and other companies that were early stage music tech companies like IUMA, which stood for Internet Underground Music Archive, and Global Music Outlet, stuff like that. So there were some guys dabbling that we all shared the same vision, but most of them didn't have enough money to. Now, IOMA did okay, but most of them didn't have enough money to survive in those days. They ran out of money and investors. It was
So
just too early, which became another through line of my career. I call it curse of the visionary. I could see where things were heading, and I was always right, but it was 5, 10, 20 years before the world would catch up. I worked on QuickTime VR at Apple. We launched it 30 years ago. In 2016, I published an article in VentureBeat as to why that would not be the year VR took off. And guess what? We're almost in 2026 and it still hasn't taken off.
right.
So it's hard to see that the technology is there and could change everything and in the emerging business models that go with it. But then you've got to upend industries and you've got to educate people as to why this is important. And it takes a while for people to actually get there.
You also spent some time with Silicon
I
Graphics,
did.
or
I did a short stint there for 18 months to help them launch Silicon Studio and
right?
bring in some big artists and stuff to work with them on some things and in their marketing department.
And then Todd Rundgren as well,
Yeah,
right?
I brought Todd in. He was an extremely cutting edge, forward thinking genius, and still is, music tech innovator and a record producer. And he was doing early things with music videos, very early. He had the second video ever played on MTV. And so he couldn't wait to get his hands on the horsepower of those SGI machines. So I had him do a performance in this wild pod he had at the time for SGI employees. And his compensation was an SGI machine. And then one of the big software companies that worked with SGI, the software was ridiculously expensive. It was like 100 grand. I got them to give him a software package as well. So that began my relationship with Todd in terms of he and I building a company together called Patronet, which was the very first service for artists, big artists, to go direct to fans without record labels. And later on, you'll see the similarity between Patronet, our venture, and Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon,
We were
right.
too early and we died. They took what we were doing and built a multi-billion-dollar business out of it. You start to see a
Yeah,
pattern here.
yeah, it's huge. Yeah, but you're always at the forefront though, right?
That's it. I'm always at the forefront, but I don't wind up with the zeros in the retirement portfolio, you know?
Yeah, but in the ethos of the fabric of the universe, your imprints there.
That is certainly true, and I appreciate you acknowledging that.
So there you have the founding of the All Access Group in what, 98, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so can you talk about some of the things you've been doing?
Well, one thing I left out, and I will jump right back to that, is because there are some overlaps here. I also had a career as a talent producer on award shows and bringing celebrities to corporate events um, for the whole time I was in tech. So for 35 years, I had this parallel career doing that. And what that did was it allowed me to exercise my producer chops and build and deepen relationships with big artists. And so the All Access Group became my consulting company that would house everything I did. And the name was not an accident. I became known as a super connector because I had unprecedented access to people that most people would never know how to reach or engage with.
Right.
And that has become a big piece of my calling card as part of my through line. I mean, we're talking like Bezos when he was just starting Amazon and, people like Prince and Michael Jackson, Taylor Swift, and all kinds of people that I've got, this is my world that I've built.
Yeah, and on the talent producer and celebrity wrangler
Yeah.
side, I mean, you co-produced a celebrity fundraising concert for the UN's Adopt a Minefield
With Paul McCartney,
campaign.
yeah. It was his venture. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and Brian Wilson is Stephen Stills, right? And
Yes,
hosted by
and Jay
Jay Leno.
Leno was the host. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
only a
these,
handful of people got to be in that room to experience the magic of Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney
right,
singing each other's favorite of their songs. So they
right.
sang Let It Be together and they sang uh uh um sorry, it's early in the morning. Brian's big song that Paul loved so much. God only knows. And it was magic to hear them singing their songs with each other like that. Plus, they were born apart, same year, two geniuses, and but only several hundred people were in the room. It was for the fundraiser. It was just so seismic.
Yeah, and but nice people too, right? I mean, they're nice
Oh,
people.
very nice people. And Paul was asking me the weirdest questions as the producer of the event. He was like, "Well, how many people are you expecting?" It was a big hotel ballroom. And he was like, "Well, shouldn't we cordon off this section? And what if we aim the speakers this way?" I'm like, "What why are you in the weeds, you know?" He was just such a
Right.
perfectionist about everything.
Yeah, and sort of a driver all along too. You have this authorship of the art of digital music in 2005, right?
Yeah, yeah, I published a book. I was asked to write a book on early music tech activity, and that became this Art of Digital Music that I co-authored with a guy who'd been the publisher of a music tech magazine, David Bettino. And then I got Stuart Copeland of the Police to write the intro. And what this was about 56 conversations with people across the ecosystem of music tech, talking about their journeys, and we included a CD in the book at the time. That was a big deal with the actual interviews.
Yeah, and they definitely got a lot of critical acclaim too.
Yeah, it was early. It was the earliest book pretty much in the convergence of the music tech sector. So again, kind of validated me as being at the forefront of that movement.
Yeah, and then your digital music consultant throughout the 2000s, right? I mean, advising
More
major
than
media.
it was more than just digital music. It morphed into being cross-sector by virtue
Yeah,
of my network and wanting to work with the people I wanted to work with, no matter what they were working on, and that still holds today.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, definitely a bridge builder between Silicon Valley and the entertainment industry, right?
well,
So,
that is for sure. And then I started in those early years. I started hosting a podcast and did 300 interviews over a 7-year period from 2010 to 2017, and it was a lot of work. I loved it. Those interviews are still available. They're evergreen, but there was no ROI financially, and it was
right.
taking way too much time. So I wound up parking that podcast. And guess what? The next year, podcasting took off. Right? You
But
starting to hear a theme with Curse of the Visionary?
but but in the early 2010s, you co-authored an influential ebook, Taking the Crowd to the Cloud, right? Social
Yeah.
media for the music industry, which became a
Yeah.
#1 Amazon bestseller.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's again,
And nobody was talking about the cloud back then either.
and then Apple Insights, Magic and Moxie, right? 2012.
Yeah.
An
That was my
insider's
book
view.
about as an homage to the Apple culture. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're still connected. I mean, because you're still connected in some ways, do you have a relationship with Tim Cook or
I do. I still have a relationship with all those guys. The people that Steve handpicked to run the company are still there for the most part.
right?
So I do have access when I need to reach out to them.
And you did your let's see here, podcast, you did your Forbes writing, right? So you did your speaking in panelists at international conferences
I
for
call all of
speaking.
that thought leadership, Stephen. That's all the
Yeah.
thought leadership. So I still publish very deep articles every couple weeks on my LinkedIn under the featured section on my homepage on various topics.
Well, you got this thing called Genie. Can you talk about that? The music tech leadership.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
You took on a new role as USA's managing director for JEE
Oh,
and
yes, of course. That was one of these startups that I advised over the years that has not really taken off at scale. Uh, that was an example of someone I admired a great deal, a gentleman named Mel Croucher, himself an early stage visionary in the UK, quite a bit older than me. But whatever he was working on, I wanted to support. So I advised that venture for a while.
there's also the Unreasonable Impact Mentor.
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
So Unreasonable is a fascinating group. It's been around a little over a decade, run by a gentleman named Daniel Epstein. What it is um, very curated, hand-picked in 3 quadrants. Founders, which they call fellows, who are up to game-changing initiatives with their ventures, investors, and mentors. Those are the 3 quadrants. And everyone in each of those sectors is hand-chosen and curated to be in Unreasonable. And so the fellows get support from the mentors and the investors. And it's sponsored by big companies like Barclays and Mars. And the individuals in these groups are exceptional. And it's the pride and privilege of my career to be a part of that organization. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I mean, you're advising growth stage entrepreneurs working on sustainable
My
impact
favorite stage is
businesses.
growth and scale when they're already funded, they're not
Right.
struggling as much, and they're accelerating. That's when I can really shine and support them strategically and with my connections.
Yeah, and they're chosen because they're going to have some outsized impacts. So it's
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
So you're definitely an outsized super connector. And so what's your next phase? Or so that's kind of one question. Another question is looking around the corner, where where are things going? And you choose the topic or the market segment, and where do you think it's going? Like you said, you've always kind of been ahead of the curve, so or around the corners, like Steve Jobs said
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you were 16. So
So what's next for me is I still love my role as a trusted advisor and consultant, working with dynamic startups that appeal to me mostly because of the people running them, the actual founders, many of whom have exited that I'm working with one-on-one and they're in transition as to what's next for them. Leaders of bigger companies. I also advise certain family offices and select number of celebrities and musicians. So that role as a trusted advisor is really something I really enjoy doing and have cultivated and honed that for the last couple of decades. Um, I'll keep doing that, and I'm also going to be weaving in sitting on a couple of boards. I just finished a board readiness course through a group called Athena Alliance, which is women led, women run, helping women get on boards. And I'm going to be looking at private pre-IPO companies because I want to participate in a couple of exits and IPOs. I want to participate in that process. And they'll probably be cross-sector. Could be deep tech, consumer tech, media tech, health tech. Probably tech and innovation will be at the heart of it because that's who I am. But that's a big piece of what I'm hoping to add to the mix in the next year or two or beyond.
do you invest as well?
I do not. No. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, I was not fortunate to participate with the big lift that Apple had with stock after I left. So I don't have a big war chest like a lot of people and my colleagues would do have to
Right.
invest. So I
Or
don't
like
do.
it, like, or some people with NVIDIA or some of the others that are
Don't get me
seeing.
started. One of my colleagues became one of the top execs at NVIDIA, and as he put it, created four generations of wealth.
Yeah, for sure.
So I cannot tell you how many people in my network are billionaires or hundreds of millions there, centenarian, whatever they are, centimillionaires. I've got a lot of those people in my world. Unfortunately, I didn't draw the straw that put me in that league yet. Now, to your other question, Stephen, about what's coming next. Well, I've been using AI for a long, long time, for a couple of decades. So it's no surprise to me that it's the next big thing. And it's here and it's not going anywhere. And as I say, whenever there's a big seismic shift with innovation, we saw it with the internet, we saw it with mobile. Every endeavor that comes along disrupts and displaces existing jobs. And guess what? Because we're innovators, we create new jobs that never existed before, and people get retrained, and it becomes a bigger pie. So uh, I see AI already making inroads in so many directions. And I think in general, it's a pretty good thing in terms of increasing productivity and efficiency, reducing overhead, reducing risk mitigation is what I want to say. I think AI is an incredibly valuable tool, but I'm a big believer that we need to partner it with the things that AI does not do well and probably never will do well, which is the human side, all the sentient pieces of how we think and operate and feel. I don't think that we're ever going to get to a point where AI just takes over the world. I just see it as a very valuable tool. I mean, think about it, for example, with surgery. We're already saying that it can be much more effective in many delicate surgical procedures to have, AI as a part of the mix, directing the surgeons. We start to get into autonomous humanoid robots. I worked on something like that a decade ago, too early. They're finally coming to the fore with companies like 1X. I'm a big believer in that. And think about it. They can replace, the tedious work like picking crops in fields and even serving as home companions to seniors. So I see those things really, really starting to take off.
Are you continuing to do this kind of intersection for yourself then between technology and media and the future and things like that? I
I
mean,
can't not do it. It's who I am.
right.
It's who I am. I always want to be at the forefront of what's next, the cutting edge, and actually playing a role and working with the people that are shaping it. one of my favorite companies is X, the Moonshot Factory, which is Google's next generation incubator. I love the that company, its ethos, the culture, the CEO, how he thinks, Astro Teller, and how that company operates reminds me of Apple. It's like an idea factory, and it attracts the best and brightest people, and they're working on things that are going to change the world, some of the world's most impossible problems. They're the ones that came up with Waymo, among others, and I'm just fascinated with that company.
So do you work with X then, or?
Well, funny enough, I don't, at least not yet. I'm actually hoping that I will wind up doing some work with them and their teams, at the very least as an advisor. Um, and I just was over there yesterday. I spend time there every couple of weeks with different colleagues that are there. And I have, started to build relationships with some of the key people in the company. So we'll see if in the new year I have the chance to do some work with them, which would make me very happy.
Or maybe DeepMind as well.
I love DeepMind too, but I love X because it's not DeepMind is very engineering driven. It's Sergey's baby. And Sergey's back coding. You can believe it. He's coding. He doesn't need to code. He just loves it. And X is also Sergey's baby, Sergey Brin. So yes, but I love being at the forefront, working with genius, brilliant, forward-thinking, progressive ventures and individuals. It's my favorite thing in the world.
So do you know Sergey?
I've not met Sergey. I've met Larry, but I've not met Sergey.
So Sergey's more nerdy then, sort of kind of like more technical, or?
Uh, mm, Probably. Yeah. I wouldn't want to put a label on him since I haven't met the man, but yeah, I think so from everything I've read and heard.
Right. But today the concept of a nerd is not a bad thing.
No, and in fact, weirdly, as you know, I just mentioned I publish these thought leadership articles every couple of weeks on LinkedIn. I just did my one of my most recent ones a couple of weeks ago on the fact that neurodivergence is a superpower.
Right.
So many founders are on the spectrum, and it used to be this stigma. It has been forever, for decades, a stigma that people are loners and antisocial, but they're absolutely brilliant. But the other side of genius, as I learned from all those years with Steve, is um, this visionary aspect, the ability to see what's coming and create the future, and do it with diligence and focus and deliberation, with bright minds all around you. And I love that. So I also want to be advising more founders that are. I published another article that for VCs and PE firms about why they need someone like myself to support founders like that in their portfolio as an insurance policy to help those guys get to exit. Because a lot of those founders just don't know what they don't know. They're in their own world.
Right.
And if they have someone like me that speaks their language and also helps to plug them into the rest of the world and the ecosystem, they're going to be that much more empowered and effective.
So Kelly, this is the last question. And what recommendations or questions do you want to leave the audience?
What questions do I want to leave the audience?
Yeah.
Say more. I'm not sure I understand what you want me to.
Okay. So one aspect is what recommendations you want to leave the audience, and that could be,
Okay, okay.
uh, so that's one facet. The other one is, are there any questions that people should think about?
Well, listen, and again, you won't be surprised to hear I've got an article in my litany on LinkedIn about the lost art of critical thinking. I believe that people aren't taught critical thinking skills in school anymore, and I think they've devolved and deferred to what's on the device and AI. I'll just turn it over to AI. It'll tell me what to do. So I really want to encourage people to embrace critical thinking. Think for yourself. Think outside the box. Talk to people that have different beliefs than you do. You know, um, Lean in, ask provocative questions, be curious, be thoughtful. I really think that that's a terribly important skill in general that's lost. that has been lost. So I want to encourage people to embrace that again. And I want to encourage people to have a growth mindset and be progressive and embrace change, and not just technology, not just innovation, but being able to pivot and being nimble when things don't go your way in general is a really powerful skill. And if you need help, get help. One of the things I'm really good at doing with my clients is showing them multiple lenses that they aren't currently looking through. And my favorite response is, gee, I never thought of it like that.
So you're a believer in combinatorial thinking and asking thoughtful questions
Indeed.
and thinking in a critical counterfactual way as well, and
Multidimensional, spirituality, pragmatic business, the whole shebang.
yeah, do a lot of association and networking and piloting, experimenting, and having perseverance plus optimism
And resilience.
and resilience.
Yeah.
So those are great sort of takeaways for the audience. So Kelli, thank you for coming in. That was a
Stephen,
really
it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
yeah, it was really interesting journey. So
Good.
thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.